Hello, everyone, and welcome to Debra and Peter are doing a podcast. And Debra, how are you today?
I'm all right, actually. I've had quite a tough day at work. We're coming up to trying to present our budget to our trustees for next year, and you all know yourself that can be quite an interesting, sometimes contentious sort of period of time where you're trying to get the information together. You're trying to do what's right for the organisation whilst at the same time meeting the aspirations of your board, and so we're right in the middle of that at the moment, and it's lots of balancing conversations and trying to make sure people understand different things. So it's time consuming and challenging, but it's part of the job.
Well, good luck with making it all add up. We heard last time how interested you are in maths and numbers and all the rest of it. So I'm sure you'll be able to balance the books in due course, even if it feels difficult at the moment.
Yes.
What have you got to talk about today? You kick us off.
Well, I touched on this a few weeks ago, but this business about health league tables, Peter, has me very activated. And I'll be completely honest with you. I don't like league tables at all. I don't feel that they're helpful. I don't think that scoring is helpful. And I certainly don't feel, it's always felt to me ironic that often with league tables, what happens is you're told that if you're down a table, if you're down at the bottom of the table, or you're not performing as well as somebody else, you're going to get less funding. You'll be punished, by not having freedom, not having funding. Whereas it's always seemed to me that they're probably the people who do need more of the funding and do need more of the help, so you just kind of exacerbate the situation. And I'm also not sure, because the other thing that always bothers me about tables is they're not weighted. I'm very conscious of this in school. So I used to be the vice chair of governors of a school, and we were a very good school. We were rated outstanding by Ofsted, but actually our particular catchment area was a lot of young people where English was a second language, a lot of young people where they only had one parent or they had an absentee father very often in their cases, where they didn't necessarily have an environment where the home environment was conducive to them learning. And so we had a lot, our staff team, our teachers and our staff team and our support team and our SEND folk did the most incredible job that we were able to get to outstanding. Whereas I'd see another school a few miles away in a different catchment area, also rated outstanding, but where their students were largely pulled from, what's the word I'm looking for, an environment which was more conducive and supportive to young people learning, if that makes any sense. And so it's these things that I think it's, the performance of any hospital, any school, any large organisation is nuanced, and it's impacted by its environment and by society and by what's going on around it. So I'm just not a fan, but I think you feel differently, don't you, about league tables?
Oh, I love a league table. Yeah, I love a league table. And this comes from an Ebbsfleet United supporter who are currently 6 points adrift, at least 6 points adrift at the bottom of the national conference. So, when I was in the education department, league tables were a really big thing. And I think it's hard to deny that they haven't been a driver of overall performance in English education. And when you look at some of the countries that have abandoned league tables, how they have drifted back. So I think that absolute and relative measures have some value, and I appreciate that they are a blunt instrument, but at the same time they concentrate the mind. So I kind of, for the sake of an argument, I kind of just want to leave it there and say league tables are really good, and anything that detracts from the absolute level of attainment is frankly an excuse, and we shouldn't forgive schools or hospitals for not doing quite so well because the intake of pupils or patients isn't quite what it should be. Now, so there we are. I'll stop there and discuss, and then I might get a little bit more sophisticated in a minute.
I mean, I'm not going to argue with data, Peter. So if there is data that says league tables improves overall performance and overall outcomes for students, I'm prepared to accept that. And if an absence of league tables the data shows that performance in those places goes down. I'm prepared to accept that. So I'm prepared to be more open-minded about league tables, but I still just do feel very uncomfortable about it, in the sense that, I mean, I'm just thinking about when you're working within those environments,
Yeah,
it's so, which I have experienced,
yeah,
it's so demoralizing, challenging. It's because what happens is when you get ranked low, it's not just a question of nobody cares, they just carry
yeah.
on. All of the staff feel defeated. All of the staff feel that they're not working hard enough. Nobody appreciates them. Nobody understands. In other words, the knock-on effect is to like make it even harder to get people to see what the possibilities are and to see how they can change and stuff like that. So I just have a sense that the bluntness of the tool causes damage, which makes it hard for them, because
Yeah.
you don't very often see, do you? Although again, you would know, I don't have hospital league tables, but in education tables, they do, you know, some people move around slightly. I guess it's a bit like the Premier League and the, you know, whatever the next league down is in football. I don't
There's,
know, whatever they're
there's,
called. It's a bit like, you know, you people tend to stay at the top, tend to stay in the middle, tend to stay at the bottom, and there's a little bit of moving up and down. So if you could prove to me that the and also it's a bit like when the education system says only X% of children should be getting an A or an A star at a thingy, and if it's more than that, there's a problem in the system. Whereas I'm thinking, well, maybe everybody's been raised up. With a league table, somebody's always got to be at the bottom,
there,
regardless of how well they've performed. They're going to fall to the bottom. So it's those sorts of things that I find hard to get my head around.
yeah, but that's okay. In any ranking, you're going to find a certain place, and I would argue that could be motivating to get yourself beyond the place you are at the moment. But where I do have some sympathy and is that if if we are to achieve positive change, one does need to appeal to the motivations of individuals. And I do agree that there are a lot of public servants who can feel incredibly demoralized by the outcomes of these tables, and particularly by the sometimes deliberately distorted reporting of what
Yeah.
the data means. So what uh, Tim Brighouse did, Sir Tim Brighouse, remarkable educationalist, an extraordinarily wise man who was, you know, always on the side of, well, fundamentally children, but also the teachers who were teaching them, was he created this concept of families of schools, where he put together groups of schools with similar intakes and similar contexts, but potentially in different bits of London or even different bits of the country, and then confronted the leaders of those schools with the differential results which they were achieving with pupils of a similar prior level of attainment or contextual background, and invited them to draw their own conclusions from the data. And that was really exciting
Wow.
because it took the motivation of the teachers who are coming to work to do the best they can for their pupils to decide for themselves. It's a bit like the conversation we were having about performance management inside the workplace,
Yeah.
to decide for themselves, oh my goodness, if they're achieving that with pupils like this, what could we do to make things better? And what might we learn from one another to do even better for the pupils that were with us? It's particularly effective when you put schools together that aren't located geographically close to one another, because you remove that issue of competing for admissions.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but that worked really well, and that was about data. It was about measurement. It was about ranking. It was about confronting people with differential um, uh, impact. Now, I don't know what it is they're proposing to measure in
Yeah.
hospitals, but if in your hospital you were able to see that there were things which were being achieved that other professionals were managing to do, that you might aspire to do, that feels both challenging and also empowering, because you're being invited to have a go at making things better.
So your advice to the health secretary then, Peter, would be to adopt the Brighouse model.
I think so, at least to start with. To pick families of hospitals or families of organizations that are apparently achieving differential impact when they should be achieving something similar, and get going with that first. You may take more people with you, because it appeals not. Remember, I said there are three things. My formula for education success: reduce bureaucracy, sharper challenge, improve support. I think the thing with contextual tables is that you don't just get the sharper challenge, but you also create a dynamic for improved support.
And actually, I will concede a point here, actually, Peter, because it reminds me of one of my fellow trustees on the in-kind direct board, a chap called Tom Moody, who works for Procter & Gamble. And we were talking about, our particular circumstances and talking about the environment in which charities are operating, which is, as you know, absolutely brutal. It's really, most of us are on our knees struggling to survive, wondering how the hell we're going to get from, 1 month to the next, or many of us are. But one of the points he made when we were having this conversation, he said that in his experience, it's always helpful to assume that the problem is with you, not with the external environment. He said, because as soon as you start blaming the external environment, you take away from yourself the power and the energy and the creativity to innovate and to do things differently. He said, if you own it, if you say, look, let's assume we're the problem, we're not quick enough, we're not fast enough, we're not sharp enough in our messaging, we're not sharp enough in our delivery, then we will make ourselves better at those things. And then we may or may not have an impact regardless of the environment that we're in. And he said that literally about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So that struck me, and I shared it with my own leadership team. And I think I can concede that point. There is something similar to that. If you're constantly saying, well, of course, we have more challenging kids in our catchment area, so of course it's harder for us. You take away, whereas if you're saying, actually, let's say, regardless of the catchment area, we can do these things, then the people do have the energy to do it. So I'll give you that one.
And that's
you may have in my little happy book for that, Peter.
And that was so we would have these conversations a lot back in the kind of education days, when Andrew Adonis would be someone, Lord Adonis would be someone who was unforgiving of the contextual value-added measures and saw all those things as an excuse, and was relentless in it. There is no reason whatsoever that any school in this country should be achieving, fewer than 25% of its schools getting 5 or more GCSEs. So don't give me all this contextual stuff, and don't put together all the schools that are achieving hopeless results with one another at the moment, because they'll just compare notes on how hopeless they would be. If you want to be the best person at taking football free kicks in the world, you don't practice with Peter Wanless, you practice with David Beckham, and over and over and over again. So you have to put together people who are achieving really well with people who are achieving whatever the raw material, in order to create that sense of aspiration. And then I think we're all on different parts of the spectrum about the sticks and carrots and what the right mix is at particular moments in time. And some people, of course,
I think that's
really well to sticks.
I think that's a very interesting perspective. Definitely. Talking of perspectives, Peter, I think it was a few podcasts ago now when we got to the end and we were talking about remote working, and then we ran out of time and we had to stop, and we said we'd come back to it.
Yes, we talked about flexible. We talked about flexible working hours, didn't we? But we didn't really talk about flexible locations.
Yeah. And I was talking about remote working, and it is interesting because there is this sort of backlash about remote working, which I find really interesting. People have got to come into offices and all these, and people bang on about, when you work remotely, you lose the water cooler moments. Although I always, Peter, have to massively laugh about that, because in my living memory of over 40 years of going into offices to work, the water cooler moments were rarely the place where people suddenly had a brilliant idea or created a fantastic relationship and came up with something that's transformed the organisation. Mostly it's where people stood to whinge and bitch about how much they hated their manager, how shit the conditions were, how they hated their job, For me, the water cooler moments were never those positive, wonderful things. It's where everybody had a moan. Or, they moaned about the person they sat next to always had stinky food for their lunch or what have you. So it's just like the rose tinted glasses all these people have about it. But here's the thing for us. So we were kind of forced into remote working. Obviously, everybody was during the pandemic. But what happened with DSE is we kind of stuck with it. And a lot of it was to do with costs. We realized we couldn't continue to function if we had to still find money to pay for buildings and all the associated costs with that. So it's sort of, it was a business decision really to go fully remote so that we could, keep going effectively. But I have to say, I mean, we had a pretty good culture at DSC before we went remote. People got on pretty well, etc. But the culture and the relationships and the creativity between my team now is absolutely unbelievable. Like, people get on better than they ever have. They know each other better than they ever have. The sort of the rankings, if you know what I mean, like, because although we're generally a relatively flat structure, nonetheless, there's still a chief exec, there's still directors, there's still managers, etc. All of those have sort of really got very flattened. People are much more likely to tell the truth, to say what they really think, to engage fully, ever since we went remote. No matter how good a culture we were, in the olden days, we used to have much more of a silo. Marketing did marketing and nobody else could interfere, and training did training. And people, like, training and marketing are a great example, actually, because training were always moaning that their stuff wasn't being marketed enough, and marketing were always saying, well, you're not giving us the copy in time. It was just this cycle. It was everybody's right and everybody's wrong, and there's just blame going. Whereas now the relationship between the two is much more dynamic, it's much more cooperative, it's much, this is the challenges we're facing, which is why we're struggling to get the copy to you. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's just better, but you have to be disciplined about it. So what we've done is we've realised that, whereas in an office environment, things mostly, when you're working remotely, you've got to put an enormous amount of effort into it. So we have frameworks and quite strict disciplines about our remote working. So every single member of our staff, from me, the chief executive, right with the organisation, we have to log in every morning at 9:30 onto this joint Zoom call. So the entire organisation, no exceptions, unless there's a really good excuse they've got a day off or there's a client meeting or one of the trainers is training. But other than that, we all rock up and we spend 10 minutes just sort of chatting. So everybody comes together and connects and sees each other's faces, and you get to say, like, oh, how was the play you went to last night? Or, Jose, what did you get up to at the weekend, or whatever. Then every team has what's called checkout at the end of each day. So it varies. We started about 4 and they go up to about 5, but they come together again for 10, 50 minutes, which is the equivalent of just the end of the day. I'm off now. But it's just like, how's your day been? Is everything okay? Anything crop up today? Just that. Again, it's not particularly work focused necessarily, but it's just a way of people coming together at the end of the day. And then every Wednesday, we have a half hour, what we call all staff, where, again, no exceptions for seniority, and you have to organise your diary around it. So you've got to have a really good reason not to be there. And everybody logs in at 11:15 for half an hour. And what we do is we randomly assign people into groups. So you could end up with anybody. And the rule is you are not allowed to talk about work. You have to gossip and moan and complain and talk about the football or whatever, but you're not allowed to talk about work. And because they're mixed up every single week, so some week, you might have one of our part-time management, part-time accounts assistant in the same room as the director of development with 4 or 5 other people. You get to know people better and you get to see that they're real human beings and things like that. And there are a whole load of other stuff as well. I'm conscious I'm taking up all the airspace, but you do have to put disciplines in, and things like, people have to have their cameras on. Because I always say, like, if you don't have your camera on, it's the equivalent of being in a physical space with a paper bag over your head. So we have very strict rules about things like that. But yeah, anyway, so basically I'm a huge fan of it now. I'm a massive convert. Because, again, horrible, hard-nosed business, better relationships, better productivity, better creativity, better innovation, better people supporting each other. And, of course, my staff don't have to travel. And it's cheaper for them. I've now got people all over the country, whereas before we had a Liverpool office and a London office, so we were restricted in who we could recruit. And also we have a lot more parents and people who have caring responsibilities, because it's easier to manage when you haven't got to, like, drop your kid off at school and then get on a train and then get to, actually they drop the kid off, they come back, they carry on at work. I will stop now. I could wax lyrical about it for hours.
There's so much we could pick up on there and come back to in future shows, I'm sure. I mean, your comment about you must have your cameras on is interesting, because I've been in a session about neurodiversity where I've been told that requiring someone to have their camera on is anti EDI, and that I'm not respecting their freedom and preference not to be seeing themselves and other people on the screen all the time. brackets discuss. In big organizations, obviously some of the things you're describing you can't do. So I have had to give space for teams and divisions and directorates to work out for themselves how they're going to tackle some of this stuff. And people have done it with a greater or lesser degree of rigidity. And so that has its pluses and its minuses, because you then have people with inconsistent experiences of how often they're expected to be together with one another, either in the office or face to face or whatever. And I think at some point there's going to be for my successor, there'll be a bit of a kind of reckoning around all of that, and they're going to need to be some big conversations with one another about how are we feeling and what's working well and what's working less well, and is this looseness forever the right thing, or will we want to put in place some corporate disciplines? One corporate discipline we have put in place that's working really well is we're now recruiting people at particular fixed points in every month. And so if you are a November recruit, then in early December, you will come together wherever you are across the NSPCC, whatever function, whatever location, whatever grade, and meet the chief executive. And I will say something about what we stand for, and I hope people are enjoying themselves, and how I was once in a job which was absolutely awful and I just wanted to leave after a month, and if they're feeling like that, they need to know that they've got options. But then invite people just to share a little bit about where they've come from and why they've chosen to work for the NSPCC. And these conversations, they're a bit like your randomized discussions, but they are remarkable in terms of the insights and the experiences and the backgrounds which people are bringing into the organization. And so I leave from each of these sessions feeling incredibly excited about the people that are coming into the organization, and the people coming into the organization feel like they are not alone, and that there are people with very different, distinct interests and skills from them, but a shared kind of passion for what we're trying to do. So those corporate consistencies, I think, are going to be increasingly important as we sort of make sense of remote and hybrid working. So
That's
do you have no office at all now?
Sorry?
You have no head office at all?
No, we have a registered head office, which is our lawyers. So we do still come together. We have staff days together, and and our rule is that you will always meet face to face with your line manager for your performance review. So so of course people meet together. And so I'm not saying like never see each other in flesh again. And there is something wonderful about that. Although it's very funny, because our staff day when we all came together this summer, I think one common thread was it was all wonderful being together, but God, now we remember how much we all hated commuting. And in fact, one of my staff members who was in Cyprus, took her 2 days to get from Cyprus to our staff day, because she had to come via Poland because there's all sorts of problems with planes and things like that. And she's like, now that was what you call a commute. But your thing you were just saying about like your induction days, really, isn't it, with your new staff?
Yeah.
We have a thing at DSC called a welcome party, which we've had for years. We used to have them face to face. Now, obviously, we have them virtually. And what we do is every time we have a new member of staff, which isn't that often, to be fair, because we have very low staff turnover at DSC, but when we do have a new member of staff, we throw a welcome party for them. So instead of giving we still give leaving dues to people when they leave, but we also have a welcome party, which is basically exactly the same as a leaving party with speeches. But with those, because we don't yet know the individual, we obviously know why they got the job, we know their CV, so we talk about that. But what I do is I always talk about the job they've come to do and why the job they've come to do is really important. So, you've come to be a researcher, and you're going to be trawling through hundreds of trusts and foundations, annual report and accounts. And there are times when that's going to feel like soulless, life-sucking stuff. But actually, at the end of that process, as a result of your work, a fundraiser is going to read something you've written, and as a result of that, is going to raise £25,000, which is going to pay for a bed in a hospice. So what we do is we link the activity they're doing to the outcome, much as you do at
Oh, I
NSPCC, and
love
they're
that.
so popular and successful. And of course, it makes our new people feel really like, wow, they're giving me a party. It's like we do make a huge fuss of new people, but that's because we don't very often have many.
Oh,
People tend not to leave DSC.
I love that. I love that idea. And
Yeah.
back to Tim Brighouse, who we were discussing earlier. He had a great skill. Whenever there were a group of teachers or civil servants, whoever it was, together, he would have these lines about how they're going to be writing books about us one day. What we're doing together is going to achieve this or that, much in the spirit of your sort of describing. Looking forward, so much time is spent assessing past performance and
Yeah.
scrutinizing people and picking them up on the things that haven't gone quite right, but painting a picture and creating a context in which you walk away feeling, I could really achieve something
that
here.
change, one of the things that chief execs so often make the mistake of when they come into organizations and to make change is that they tend to blame the need for change on mistakes of the past, on things that aren't working. So it's that kind of, this isn't working, we're going to fix it. And of course, all that happens is people are resistant to that because they've been part of the thing that wasn't working. They may have even invented the thing that you're now telling them doesn't work. And I've always said that change is about the future, not the past. You're not fixing something that's broken. What you're doing is you're creating a structure or a practice or a way of doing things that's going to serve the people you're serving 5, 10, 15 years' time. And if you frame change as being about the future rather than about fixing the past, all of a sudden resistance doesn't totally melt away, but it's much less solid and, thing like that. And also people get more excited about the change because the change isn't about, this thing is broken. It's about, wow, this new thing that we're going to be able to have in the future. So, yeah.
I don't think I've told this one before, but we did an exercise with an external facilitator shortly after I arrived at the NSPCC, where we took stop me if I've told this one before, where we got each of the members of the executive board in order of seniority to stand in a line down the middle of the room. And so the person that had been with us 25 years was furthest away from me, and I was right at the top of the line because I was newest. And each of them was invited to represent a moment in the NSPCC's history. So the person who'd been with us longest was the Reverend Benjamin Moore, standing in 1884, and then we had other people. We had someone representing the Full Stop campaign, and we had someone.
Oh, yeah.
And the idea was that you had to appreciate each of these people and what the world looked like to them. And it teaches you that at every moment in time, people were trying their best to do the best they could for children and were building something which I was then inheriting. And so it is exactly as you're saying. That then gives you a strengths-based mentality which appreciates what has come before you, as opposed to saying, well, this is wrong, that's wrong, the other's wrong.
Yeah.
We'll see if my successor adopts this approach or instead finds all the things I've got wrong.
Yeah. Well, there's that saying, isn't it? Honour the past, don't live in it. Oh, Chris, my experience has been chief execs do tend to go in and trash the work of the previous chief exec, unless they're mates and they know each other, in which case they tend to be a little more gentle. But of course, the reality is whoever takes over me at DSC will do stuff that needs fixing, that for whatever reason at the time I was like, it was way down my priority list, or I did, or whatever. I mean, we all make decisions at the time. And so there are loads of things in DSC that somebody needs to come in and fix, and that probably won't be fixed or created for the future by me because I've got other priorities to deal with. So I'm singularly unfussed by that. Whoever takes over from me, I'm absolutely sure will find all sorts of horrors, and that's fine. It's not, I may not have known about the horrors, or I may have known about them and decided they were best left in their little corner undisturbed whilst we focus on other things. Anyway, we've probably run out of time again, have we?
I think we're there or thereabouts.
Yeah, we are. And we disagreed again. It's becoming a habit.
Yes, it is. But that's not altogether surprising.
Well, we're both learning from each other, aren't we? Which I think is really, that's the whole point of talking to people, isn't it? And listening and sharing your own views. so that we all move on and enrich ourselves in some way.
Let's hope so. Well, it's been great to speak to you again. Have a lovely week, and I'll
you
see
too.
you next time. Maybe
You
we'll
will
talk about
do.
Christmas.
Maybe we will. Bye, everybody. Bye, listener. I'm doing my Terry Wogan again.